Have you ever noticed that the moment you feel truly confident, something inside you tightens? Not your body, something deeper, something that watches you from the corner of your own mind and whispers, "This isn't you." And in that whisper, the confidence doesn't just fade, it collapses. Not because someone rejected you, not because you failed, but because some part of you still believes that the person standing there, shoulders back, voice steady, is an imposter wearing a mask that the real you isn't allowed to touch. Think about the last time you walked into a room and felt genuinely good about yourself. Maybe you were dressed well, maybe you had just accomplished something. Maybe you were simply having a day where the reflection looked back at you with recognition instead of disappointment. And then what happened? Did you sustain it? Or did some invisible hand pull the string and suddenly you were calculating how long you could hold this posture before someone saw through it? Before someone realized that underneath this performance, you were still the person who was once ignored, dismissed, laughed at, or simply not chosen. This is not about imposter syndrome. This is not about self-doubt in the conventional sense. This is about something far more specific and far more binding. This is about the architecture of your ego. Not the loud, arrogant ego that people warn you against, but the quiet, protective ego that you never named, because it feels too much like home to recognize as a structure at all. The ego that doesn't inflate your importance, but instead guards the memory of your diminishment. The ego that doesn't make you believe you're better than others. It makes you believe you're still exactly as small as you were when someone first made you feel that way. And here's what most people never see. This ego doesn't fight against your confidence because it hates your growth. It fights against your confidence because it is loyal to a version of you that no longer exists. It is loyal to the child who learned that being visible was dangerous. It is loyal to the teenager who discovered that expectation led to disappointment. It is loyal to the young adult who built an entire identity around the belief that if you just stayed small enough, controlled enough, prepared enough, you might finally be safe from the particular pain of being seen and then rejected. So when you stand in that room feeling good, feeling capable, feeling seen, your ego doesn't celebrate with you. Your ego panics. Because confidence is not just a feeling to your ego. Confidence is a betrayal. It is you leaving the bunker. It is you stepping into territory that your ego mapped as hostile decades ago, and your ego's only job is to pull you back inside before the danger your younger self once faced can find you again. But the danger is gone. The room is not the room from your past. The people are not the people who hurt you. The rejection you fear is not the rejection you already survived, and yet your nervous system cannot tell the difference. Your ego cannot tell the difference. It responds to confidence the way a smoke alarm responds to steam. Not because there is fire, but because the mechanism was calibrated in a different time, under different conditions for a different threat entirely. You are not broken because your confidence collapses. You are not weak because you cannot sustain the feeling. You are simply operating with a security system that was installed by someone who no longer lives inside your skin. And the cruelest part is that this security system disguises itself as intuition. It feels like wisdom when it tells you to shrink. It feels like self-awareness when it reminds you of your flaws. It feels like humility when it insists that your confidence is just performance, just vanity, just a costume that the real you, the smaller, safer, more authentic you, would never wear. But what if that smaller version was never the authentic you? What if that version was the adaptation? What if the costume was what you wore when you were too afraid to be seen? And the confidence you're now trying to claim is actually the first time you've approached your real shape. Consider this: you are texting someone you care about. The conversation is going well. They are responding with warmth, with interest, with something that looks like genuine connection. And then you send a message that feels a little too honest, a little too open, a little too much like the person you actually are when no one is watching. And you see the 3 dots appear, and you wait. And in that waiting, something happens that has nothing to do with the person on the other end of the phone. Your mind begins to construct a narrative. The 3 dots become hesitation. The hesitation becomes rejection. The rejection becomes confirmation of what you always knew, that the real you, the unguarded you, the confident enough to be vulnerable you, was too much, was wrong, was the version that would eventually be abandoned, so better to abandon it first, to pull it back, to delete the message, to send something safer, something smaller, something that fits inside the container your ego built for you years ago. But the 3 dots were just 3 dots. The hesitation was just someone thinking of what to say. The rejection was a story you wrote before the other person ever finished typing. And in writing that story, you didn't protect yourself from them. You protected your ego from the possibility that you might be accepted as you are. Because acceptance as you are would mean that the version of you your ego has been protecting all this time was never the only version that deserved to exist. This is the paradox that lives at the center of your confidence problem. Your ego doesn't want you to be rejected, but it also doesn't want you to be fully accepted, because full acceptance would dissolve the boundary between who you were and who you are becoming. And your ego's entire identity is built on maintaining that boundary. Your ego is not your enemy. It is a loyal soldier who never received the order to stand down. It is still fighting a war that ended while it wasn't looking, still manning a post that no longer guards anything real, still treating every moment of expansion as a moment of exposure, still reading every signal of growth as a signal of threat. And so you perform confidence, you learn the body language, you practice the voice, you study the people who seem to own their presence effortlessly, and you mirror their movements, their pauses, their certainty. But the performance is exhausting because underneath it, your ego is running a parallel script. It is calculating the distance between your performance and your truth. Not because it wants to expose you, but because it wants to protect the part of you that believes performance is all you have. The part of you that believes if you ever stopped performing, if you ever let the mask slip, if you ever allowed yourself to be seen without the armor, the rejection would be so total, so absolute, so confirming of your deepest fears, that it is better to stay in the performance forever, to let it tire you out, to let it hollow you out, than to risk the moment where someone sees the gap between who you pretend to be and who you believe you really are. But what if there is no gap? What if the performance and the truth have been the same thing for so long that you can no longer tell which is which? What if the confidence you perform has become more real than the insecurity you protect? What if the only thing standing between you and genuine self-possession is the belief that genuine self-possession is something you have to earn, something you have to deserve, something that can be taken away if someone decides you were never worthy of it in the first place? You are in a meeting, you have an idea. It is a good idea. You know it is a good idea because you have thought it through, because it connects things other people haven't connected, because it solves a problem that everyone in the room has been circling without naming, and you feel the moment arrive. The opening, the pause, the space where your voice could enter. And you hesitate, not because you don't know what to say, not because you are afraid of being wrong. You hesitate because some part of you is still standing in a classroom from 15 years ago, where you raised your hand and gave an answer that seemed right to you, but was met with silence, or worse, with laughter that wasn't cruel, but was enough to teach you that visibility carried a price. And now, in this meeting with these adults discussing this problem, your body remembers the price before your mind can calculate the reward. Your throat tightens, your hand stays down. Someone else says something similar but less precise, and they are praised for it, and you tell yourself it doesn't matter, that you didn't want to speak anyway, that you're not the kind of person who needs recognition, that your ego is small, that you are humble, that you are above this. But humility in that moment is just the name your ego gives to fear when fear is too shameful to claim. You are not humble. You are loyal to a pattern. You are protecting the version of you who learned that speaking up was dangerous, and you are calling that protection wisdom. You are calling it character. You are calling it knowing your place. But your place was never as small as you were taught to believe. Your place was never determined by the reactions of people who saw you through the lens of their own unhealed wounds. Your place was never something you had to earn by staying quiet enough, agreeable enough, invisible enough to avoid the particular discomfort of someone else's insecurity being projected onto your visibility. And yet you keep performing. You keep performing confidence in the moments where performance is possible, and you keep collapsing into the old pattern in the moments where performance fails, because performance always fails eventually. You cannot perform your way through every interaction. You cannot perform your way through intimacy. You cannot perform your way through the quiet hours at night when the mask comes off and you are left with the person your ego has convinced you is the real you, the tired one, the uncertain one, the one who still feels like a child wearing adult clothes, waiting for someone to notice the seams. But the seams are not evidence of fraud. The seams are evidence of construction. You are not an imposter. You are a work in progress that your ego keeps trying to freeze in time. Your ego wants a final form. It wants a fixed identity. It wants to say, this is who you are. This is who you have always been. This is who you will always be. Because a fixed identity is predictable. A fixed identity is safe. A fixed identity cannot be disappointed by hope because hope has been surgically removed from the equation. But you are not fixed. You were never fixed. The version of you that was rejected, that was ignored, that was made to feel small. That version was not the true version. That version was the version that existed under specific conditions, with specific people in a specific context that no longer defines your reality. And your ego's refusal to let that version die is not loyalty. It is clinging. It is clinging to a map of territory that has changed so completely that the landmarks no longer exist. The roads have been rebuilt, and the dangers your map warned you about were removed years ago by people who never knew they were building over your wounds. You are driving through a city that has been renovated, but your GPS is still running on old software. And every time you try to take a new route, every time you try to arrive somewhere different, somewhere better, somewhere that actually matches who you are now, the GPS recalculates, not to help you, but to return you to the starting point. Because the starting point is known. The starting point is controlled. The starting point is where your ego learned to navigate. And your ego would rather keep you lost in familiar territory than risk the disorientation of a landscape it has never mapped. This is why your confidence feels borrowed. This is why it feels like a performance. Because it is being constantly audited by a part of you that has no stake in your arrival, only in your departure from the place it considers home. Your ego doesn't care where you go. It cares that you don't go too far from where it thinks you belong. And where it thinks you belong is wherever you were when you first learned to protect yourself from feeling too much, wanting too much, being too much. You meet someone new. They are interesting. They are interested. They ask you questions that require more than surface answers. And for a moment, you feel the old pattern try to engage. You feel the urge to give the safe answer, the funny answer, the answer that deflects before it reveals. But something different happens this time. You give a real answer. You say something true. You let them see a corner of the room you usually keep locked. And they don't recoil. They lean in. They mirror your honesty with their own. And for a moment, a brief, terrifying, exhilarating moment, you feel what it might be like to be known. Not performed, not managed, not strategically revealed in doses calculated to be palatable, just known. And then the fear arrives. Not immediately, not in the moment. The moment is too full for fear. The fear arrives later when you're alone, when the interaction is over, when your ego finally gets your attention and says, "Do you know what you just did? Do you know how much you showed? Do you know what happens now when they realize that was just the surface? That there's more underneath? That the person they think they met is just the first room in a house with infinite doors?" And your ego doesn't say this to protect you from them. Your ego says this to protect the version of you that believes being known is the same as being consumed. The version that believes if someone sees too much, they will eventually see the part that was once rejected, and they will reject it too. And the rejection will be worse this time because you handed them the map. You showed them where to strike. You made yourself visible in a way that cannot be undone. But visibility is not vulnerability. Visibility is just presence. Vulnerability is the choice to stay present when presence feels dangerous. And your ego has convinced you that presence is always dangerous, because presence was dangerous once. But once is not always. Once is not even usually. Once is just once. And your ego has been extrapolating from a single data point for decades, building an entire cosmology of self-protection around an event that no longer has the power it was originally assigned. You are not the person who was rejected. You are the person who survived the rejection. And survival is not a personality trait. Survival is a phase. It is the phase that gets you from the wound to the healing. But your ego has turned survival into an identity. It has convinced you that the vigilance required to survive a threat is the same as the wisdom required to thrive in safety. And they are not the same. They are opposites. Vigilance contracts. Wisdom expands. Vigilance sees danger everywhere. Wisdom sees possibility everywhere. Vigilance keeps you alive. Wisdom lets you live. And you have been alive for a long time. You have been surviving for a long time. Your confidence has been performing survival in a theater where the audience has changed, the stage has been rebuilt, and the only person still watching the old show is you. Think about the compliments you deflect, not the ones you accept gracefully because you've learned the social choreography of gratitude, the ones you genuinely cannot receive, the ones that land on you like a foreign object, something that doesn't fit your internal architecture, something that must be returned immediately before it does damage to the structure you've built. Someone tells you you're capable and you hear them listing your failures. Someone tells you you're attractive and you hear them describing someone else. Someone tells you they value you and you hear a debt being created that you will eventually default on. This is not modesty. This is not authenticity. This is the ego's filtration system, ensuring that no external validation can reach the part of you that your ego has designated as the true self, the wounded self, the rejected self, the self that exists in opposition to anything that might contradict its narrative of diminishment. Your ego allows you to perform confidence because performance is temporary, performance is controlled, performance can be withdrawn. But your ego will not allow you to receive confirmation of that confidence from the outside world, because external confirmation would mean the performance is no longer a performance. It would mean the confidence is real. And if the confidence is real, the old identity is obsolete. And your ego cannot let the old identity become obsolete, because the old identity is the only identity your ego knows how to protect. It has spent years, decades building fortifications around that identity. It has installed warning systems, tripwires, automatic responses designed to repel any threat to the narrative that you are still the person who was once made to feel small. And now you are asking it to tear down those fortifications because you have grown, because you have healed, because you are ready to be someone else. But your ego doesn't know how to be the security system for a person it doesn't recognize. It doesn't know how to protect someone who doesn't need protection. It doesn't know how to justify its existence if the threat it was built to guard against has been resolved. So it invents new threats. It finds danger and safety. It interprets growth as exposure. It reads every moment of expansion as a moment of vulnerability, not because expansion is inherently vulnerable, but because expansion is inherently new, and your ego has no protocols for the new. It only has protocols for the old. And the old protocols say, shrink, hide, wait, survive. The old protocols say, confidence is a trap. Visibility is a weapon that will be turned against you. The only safe place is the place you've already been. But you have already been there. You have already survived that. You have already proven that you can endure the thing your ego is still trying to protect you from. And every moment you spend performing confidence instead of inhabiting it is a moment where you are honoring a fear that has already been faced, protecting a wound that is already scarred, serving a master who no longer holds the power they once held over your becoming. The confidence you perform is still owned by who you were, not because you are fraudulent, not because you are fake, but because the part of you that authorizes your confidence is still the part of you that was once denied it. You are asking permission from the very wound that made you believe you needed permission. You are seeking validation from the very rejection that taught you validation was scarce. You are trying to become someone new while still paying rent to the landlord of your old self, still checking in with the gatekeeper who was installed at a time when gates were necessary. And the gatekeeper doesn't know the neighborhood has changed. The gatekeeper doesn't know that the threats are gone, that the walls are now fences, that the locks are now doors. The gatekeeper only knows one protocol: keep out what hurts. And since growth hurts, since becoming hurts, since leaving behind what was familiar hurts, the gatekeeper reads growth as threat and does what it was built to do. It closes the gate. It sounds the alarm. It tells you that the confidence you feel is dangerous, that the expansion you crave is reckless, that the person you are becoming is an imposter, wearing the skin of the person you were supposed to stay. But you were never supposed to stay. You were never supposed to be a monument to your own pain. You were never supposed to build a shrine to the version of you that learned to survive by becoming small and then worship at that shrine for the rest of your life. The version of you that was rejected was not the final draft. The version of you that was ignored was not the definitive edition. The version of you that learned to perform confidence because real confidence felt too dangerous. That version was a bridge, not a destination. And bridges are meant to be crossed, not lived on. You are still standing on the bridge. You've been standing on the bridge for years, performing the confidence of someone who has arrived, while your ego holds the map to a place you've already left. And the performance is exhausting because it requires you to be two people at once, the person you are becoming and the person your ego insists you still are. The person who walks into rooms with presence and power, and the person who watches that walk from the corner waiting for the moment when the floor gives out, when the mask slips, when someone finally sees what your ego has been warning you about all along, that you were never really that capable, that you were never really that capable, that you were never really that worthy of the space you were trying to occupy. But what if the floor doesn't give out? What if the mask doesn't slip because there is no mask? What if the confidence you perform and the confidence you feel have been the same thing for so long that the only difference between them is the belief that one is real and one is fake? What if your ego's insistence on distinguishing between performance and authenticity is itself the performance, the last desperate act of a security system that knows its job is obsolete but keeps showing up to work anyway, generating reports about threats that no longer exist, conducting drills for emergencies that will never come? You are not performing confidence, you are rehearsing it. Every time you stand tall when your ego tells you to shrink, every time you speak when your ego tells you to stay silent, every time you allow yourself to be seen when your ego tells you to hide, you are not faking anything. You are practicing the only thing that has ever had a chance of becoming real, the version of you that your ego cannot recognize, because your ego was built before that version existed. The confidence you feel is not borrowed from someone else. It is not stolen from a future you haven't earned. It is generated by the same system that generates your fear, your nervous system, your history, your accumulated experience of the world. The difference is not in the source. The difference is in the interpretation. Your ego interprets the same physiological signals as danger, elevated heart rate, heightened awareness, the sense of being seen. But these signals are not inherently dangerous. They are the signals of presence. They are the signals of engagement. They are the signals of a person who is actually in the room, actually in the conversation, actually in their life, instead of watching from the safety of the sidelines, performing participation while waiting for the moment when they can retreat back to the bunker, where their ego keeps the old version warm and fed and safe from the terrifying possibility that the world might actually accept the person they are trying to become. Your ego is not evil. Your ego is not your enemy. Your ego is a loyal servant who has been given an outdated job description, and the work of becoming who you are, the real work, the work that happens underneath the performance, underneath the narrative, underneath the constant negotiation between who you were and who you are becoming, is the work of updating that job description, not by fighting your ego, not by rejecting your ego, not by pretending you have transcended something that is still doing its best to keep you alive, but by recognizing that your ego strategies were developed for a context that no longer exists, and that the most loving thing you can do for the part of you that was once wounded is to tell it, "Thank you. You kept me safe. You kept me whole. You kept me from disappearing completely. But the danger is gone. The war is over. And I am not the soldier you trained anymore. I am something else. I am someone else. And I need you to trust me enough to let me find out who that is. This is not a conversation you have once. This is a conversation you have every day. Every time you feel the old pattern, try to engage. Every time you feel the urge to perform confidence instead of inhabit it. Every time you catch yourself calculating how long you can sustain the posture before someone sees through it, you don't fight the calculation. You don't shame yourself for the performance. You simply notice, this is my ego doing what my ego was built to do, and I am choosing to do something else. The confidence you perform is still owned by who you were, but only because you haven't claimed it yet. Only because you are still paying the debt of a rejection that was never yours to carry. Only because you are still asking permission from a part of you that was never given the authority to grant or deny your right to exist fully in your own skin. And the claiming is not a single moment. It is not a breakthrough. It is not a realization that arrives like lightning and changes everything forever. The claiming is a practice. It is the practice of noticing when your ego tries to pull you back and choosing to stay forward anyway. It is the practice of feeling the fear of visibility and choosing visibility. It is the practice of feeling the contraction of your old identity and choosing expansion anyway. It is the practice of being in the room, fully in the room, not performing presence, but actually present, until presence becomes so familiar that your ego stops reading it as threat and starts reading it as home. Because that is what confidence actually is, not a performance, not a posture, not a mask that hides the real you. Confidence is the slow, patient, sometimes painful process of making your current self so familiar to your own nervous system that your ego stops treating it as an intruder. Confidence is the integration of who you are now with who you were then, not by keeping the old version alive, but by honoring what it taught you and releasing what it protected you from. The belief that you were ever as small as the people who couldn't see you made you feel. You are not small, you were never small, you were compressed. You were compressed by conditions that no longer apply, by contexts that no longer exist, by fears that were real once but have become ghosts haunting a house that has been rebuilt from the foundation up. And the confidence you perform is not a lie. It is a rehearsal for the truth. It is the body teaching the mind what the mind has not yet learned to believe. It is the present self demonstrating to the past self that the world did not end when the mask came off, that the rejection did not come when the truth was spoken, that the danger your ego has been warning you about was a memory, not a prophecy. So perform your confidence. Perform it until it becomes indistinguishable from the real thing. Perform it until your ego cannot tell the difference between the mask and the face. Perform it until the performance becomes the practice, and the practice becomes the identity, and the identity becomes so natural that you forget there was ever a time when you needed to perform it at all. Not because you are faking who you are, but because you are finally becoming who you are. And becoming is not a destination. It is a performance that slowly, inevitably becomes real the moment you stop auditing it against the standards of a version of yourself that was never meant to be the final draft. The confidence you perform is still owned by who you were, but only until you decide to own it yourself. Only until you stop asking the old version for permission to be the new version. Only until you recognize that the rejection you survived was not a verdict on your worth. It was a lesson in your resilience. And resilience is not something you perform. It is something you are. It has always been something you are. And the moment you let yourself believe that the person who survived is also the person who thrives, not in spite of the survival, but because of it, That is the moment the performance ends and the living begins. You are not who you were. You never were. You were always more than the rejection, more than the diminishment, more than the version your ego built its fortress around. And the confidence you feel when you let yourself feel it, that is not borrowed. That is not fake. That is you, finally, slowly, imperfectly, but truly, coming home to a self that was never lost, only hidden, only waiting, only performing patience while you gathered the courage to stop performing and start being.